Dear friends, good evening. Thank you for joining us to our series of lectures in our pre-chamber. And tonight, let's have a little conversation on the topic of alcoholism. This is a big deal because, for the most part, most people have been exposed to alcohol. Many of them have tried it. The body has done something to reject it. They have put it aside and not looked back. But yet there are many lives that have been destroyed because of the vice of alcohol. There are many families that have been dissolved. As a matter of fact, there have been many souls that have missed their opportunity to exercise a transformation simply because of alcohol. So, starting this lecture with a quote from Master Samael says, "From the pits of hell, smoke rises, and that smoke smells like alcohol." Certainly, this should be enough deterrent for any sane person. However, we tend to believe that we can negotiate. We tend to believe that we can always dominate this nefarious creature called Algol. And Algol is very seductive. Algol is that dark essence that exists within the alcohol itself. And to give you an example on how destructive this power is, let's turn the clock back in our memories and have a brief review of what we have already learned on the familiar story that is the fall of man. We know that man, epicene noun, both men and women, man existed in a perfect condition. Faculties were available, active. He could exercise dominion over the elements of nature. Men and women, they were both kings and queens of nature. But at some point, they fell prey to a temptation. In this particular temptation, we see that there is this dark character that is very seductive. A dark character that is very convincing, very inviting, not threatening at all. And he is able to lure Eve. Now, because some of you may have not seen the story from this perspective, I will invite you to open up to that which is new. Because yes, Adam and Eve are a symbol of a previous race that existed within the face of the earth. That is true. Adam and Eve is a symbol of the men and women that today exist out of Eden. That is all of us. That is also true. But it is also true that Adam is a symbol of the mind and Eve is a symbol of the sexual creative organs. They were both given an instruction. Of all the fruit, of all the trees that exist in this garden, you may eat, except of that tree, which is the tree of the science of good and evil. And they tried this particular fruit. More specifically, it was Eve, the one who was lured into trying the forbidden fruit from the tree of science of good and evil. Now, many of you have already been through a series of many lectures, and you have developed a good, solid cultural foundation. By now, you already know that the tree of the science of good and evil is associated with sexuality. The tree of the science of good and evil is not only related to the sexual creative organs, but it is also related to the super dynamic of love that has the power of transforming men and women. So Eve, symbol of the sexual creative organs, approached the tree of the science of good and evil because she had lost herself. She had forgotten about herself. She had no ability to remain calm. There was a tension, a sexual tension that is created because of the sexual creative force. And she lost the ability to listen to the voice of the innermost. Identified and fascinated, she consumed of the fruit of the science of good and evil. Certainly, when the sexual creative organs experience or consume of that forbidden fruit, which we know is that fornication, it is the wasting of the creative waters. Well, evidently, Eve in the story gives of this fruit to Adam. Adam also eats of the fruit. And suddenly they both realize their mistake. They realize that they were naked. The inner voice, the voice of the real being, speaks and says, "Where are you? Why are you hiding?" And after that realization, they get expelled from the Garden of Eden. Here we see Eve inviting Adam. We see Eve falling, and we see Adam falling. Certainly, in our physical vehicle, by now you have all experienced that when the sexual creative organs are abused, when they experience the sensation of touch that is dramatically exaggerated at the level of the creative organs, well, if they fall, the mind also falls. So we have been already able to see the story of the book of Genesis. Now we're looking at it from a different perspective. This is the perspective of the wisdom of Gnosis. And this is the true reason for the fall of man. This is a very traumatic event. And in the likes of this traumatic event, as we observe the writings in the history of Quetzalcoatl, we can see that the very same story is presented. Now the symbols are different. And they are different because they are meant to convey the same teaching, but to a different group, in a different location, under a different idiosyncrasy, with a different cultural foundation. In this particular story, we see Quetzalcoatl. And look at him as he is dressed with his battle garment. Not only he is wearing this beautiful head adornment that indicates that his pineal gland is awakened. Just like Buddha, that has that hair arrangement on the top of his head, showing that the pineal gland is awakened. Just like Jesus, just like the apostles on the day of Pentecost. Jesus, the angels, they have a halo of light, symbol of an awakened pineal gland. In the fire of Pentecost, which is the fire of Kundalini that emerges out the top of the head, we see that the apostles also have this pineal gland intimately developed. And the pineal gland, of course, corresponds with the sexual creative organs that we have already spoken of. But in this case, we see Quetzalcoatl with a beautiful hair adornment. We see him dressed with his gown of being an officiant. And we see him with a staff of wisdom on his hand. We also see him with a shield. And that shield, notice that it has a seashell that has been sliced in half. The seashell, symbol of the teaching of the creative waters, and sliced in half because it is a wisdom that has been opened. It is a wisdom that has been revealed to him. So Quetzalcoatl is walking towards the land of red. Red is a very interesting color because from this particular perspective, red is indicative of the highest, of the most superior spirituality. And as he is walking the narrow path, he comes across an old man. You can see that the old man is speaking. You can see the effect of the word emanating from the mouth of that man. And you can see that there are some words that appear white, other words that appear dark. This is like speaking half-truths. This is like inviting temptation in a way that is entirely non-threatening, just like the ego. And this man stops Quetzalcoatl on his tracks, and he said, "Where are you going?" Quetzalcoatl says, "I am headed to the land of red." The man says, "You must drink of this pulque. If you don't drink, you will not pass." Pulque is an alcoholic beverage that is made from the agave, the maguey. Some of you may know that from that sweet sap of the agave, well, tequila is prepared. In this case, pulque, well, similar to that, is also an alcoholic beverage. This man invites Quetzalcoatl, just like The serpent invited Eve, and Quetzalcoatl drank the pulque. And Quetzalcoatl fell asleep. Just like Adam and Eve were expelled from the Garden of Eden and they died, because it has been written, if you eat of the forbidden fruit, you will die. People expected to see them just collapse. The biological functions in the body cease. You see a corpse, but that is not what that meant. Death means the loss of the senses. And when Adam and Eve died, they lost all of their superior faculties. Just like we don't have today solar clairvoyance, a solar faculty like clairaudience, telepathy. We don't have omniscience. We are missing all those things. So Quetzalcoatl fell asleep. He also lost his senses. And he started snoring. And his snore is a symbol of the many lives that he spent fallen. And when he awoke as an old man and realized how much he had lost. Notice here, two versions of the same story. A divine being that fell, that is called the Pleuromatic Fall. They fell from the heavens, and they fell into a condition of unconsciousness. Both of them lured by temptation, lured by the ego. And here we see that the instrument of seduction is pulque. Just like when we abuse of the sexual organs, there is a moment in which the consciousness retreats and the ego takes charge and the person falls into a hypnotic stupor. The same thing happens with alcohol. And we share this story because alcohol is so dangerous that in this particular case, the great masters of the ancient Mexica are using it as an example of what can bring about the fall of man. Alcohol, in its origin, emanates from a root word that is called Algol. And Algol, among the ancients, was identified in the heavens as the demon star. This demon Algol is an Arabic name. And this demon always characterized itself because it was attractive. It does not discriminate. Whether you were rich or poor, this character will seduce you. It will absorb you. It will entice you with its diplomacy, and its attractiveness and its passion would be enough to invite whoever is its victim to identify itself with it. And the moment we identify, we know exactly what happens. We identify, we fall into the sleep of consciousness, because as we identify, we become fascinated. This is what happens with the vice of alcohol. This is what happens with the enticement that comes from this particular demon. And this demon was represented with the head of Medusa. Those of you who remember the story of Medusa in those adventures of Perseus, well, Medusa was this particular demon that rather than hair, she had serpents, inferior serpents, tempting serpents like that of the initial story we listened to. And whenever you looked at her in the eye, the hypnotic effect would be so intense that the person would become a statue of either stone or salt. So here we see a symbol of alcohol. But Medusa, as this representation, she was decapitated by Perseus. Perseus, a symbol of our Father who is in secret. It is our innermost. And Perseus used his sword to decapitate this demon. And remember, every time that we see the sword in this particular esoteric context, we know that the sword stands for a symbol of the sexual libido. He does not use a knife. He does not use a dagger. He uses a sword. And when we look at angels and archangels, particularly the archangels, they do have a sword as well. But we can see that it is a flaming sword. It is a sword of fire. Because it is a sexual libido that has been empowered with the fire of Kundalini. Medusa is a symbol of this demon Algol. And Algol does not discriminate. You can be rich, poor, educated, uneducated, live in a very fancy community, or be homeless. All Algol wants is the ability to deprive the consciousness the opportunity of self-realization. All it wants to do is, of course, it does that indirectly, because its main intent is to satisfy desires. The altered states of consciousness that come with alcohol are something that every human being on earth longs for, or at least has longed for at least once in their life. Every human being that walks around the face of the earth shares a common goal, and it is the elimination of suffering. It is the ability to walk into a space of happiness, of finding out what else exists other than this monotonous life of growing and working and eventually dying without seeing much more difference. But that heightened, altered state of consciousness is an extreme on this continuum that is called consciousness. On one hand, we have illumination. At the very end of that extreme, we have the perfect masters of wisdoms, like Paramartha Satya. And on the other extreme, well, we have those with a complete abandonment of the being, completely dedicated into the ego. Those are the two extremes. For us to be able to move upwards in this continuum of consciousness, certainly we have to rid ourselves of that which is inferior. You get rid of the inferior, you give an opportunity to that which is superior to come into play, to be born, to be developed, to become truly useful. And for us to shift ourselves upwards in that vertical path that exists in life, we have the ability to practice meditation. Meditation is the opposite of inebriation. Just like illumination is the opposite of the total sleep of the consciousness. Meditation and inebriation then become these two extremes of this continuum that we could define as that experience of awakening. They are opposite poles of the same force. And of course, just like we have a magnet with one side of one particular polarity and another of another, well, we have one that is positive, creative, edifying, and dignifying to the consciousness, meditation, and we have one that does not contribute at all, which is inebriation. When the great master Jesus appears in his public life after spending those many years in a secret seclusion, his very first miracle is manifested at the weddings of Canaan. And he presents himself to the wedding. And, of course, there is a celebration that suddenly stops because the wine that they already had was finished. His mother approaches Jeshua, the Savior, and she says, "Could you do something for them?" And he immediately orders them to bring new containers and to fill those containers with pure water. And as those containers become filled with the purest water, he exercises his first miracle, which is transforming the waters into wine. We cannot possibly think that the great master Yeshua, Jesus, who is a Paramartha Satya, he is a great master of perfection, that he is going to give alcohol to just a regular audience for them to drink. Because we all know what happens when people drink. We know how they behave. So to not do that, to think that, would be very inferior of us. Certainly here, this miracle is indicating that we must transform the waters of our personality into the wine of the Spirit. We must take our creative waters and transform them into the wine of wisdom. And Samael tells us we must drink of the wine of meditation from the sacred cup of concentration. All of these indications of this wine are allegorical. They speak of a transformation. They speak of something that is superior, that can lead us into a superior state as a human being. But let's talk about alcohol. First of all, alcohol impairs our ability to think. We know that somebody who drinks cannot exercise serene judgment because they become easily influenced. They are so influenced that alcohol even eliminates the sense of ethics. What some of them may consider ethical, let's speak in terms of morality, what they may consider moral when they are sober, well, once they are under the effect of alcohol, the internal change is so dramatic that morality is entirely flexible, and they will do whatever. This impairment leads them to become unable of fighting external influences. So when somebody will become inebriated, people will start clapping their hands and making fun of them, inviting them to climb on tables, to take off their shirt, and they will gladly comply. As this happens, there are many different aspects of the ego that come and emerge from the subconsciousness. The person becomes very eloquent. Then they start sharing the story of their life, sharing ideas. They start making comparisons. They speak of politics and medicine and social issues. They speak of others. They speak of whatever. But they do so with a tremendous ability. While all this is happening, the body is suffering tremendously. Because with the effect of alcohol, well, we see that there is a poisoning that takes place in the body. But it is not an acute poisoning. It is not as if somebody consumes cyanide or arsenic that they can collapse and just die in a few minutes. This is more of a chronic effect. That means an effect that takes place in a long time span. They will see their breathing affected, the heart rate, the body temperature. There's a gag reflex that becomes overcome. And of course, it can lead into a poisoning of such kind that the body can fall comatose and they can even die. If this happens with somebody who abuses the intake of alcohol and they continue to do these things, well, of course, in the long term, there will be malnutrition because drinking will become more important. There would be damage to the pancreas. There would be damage to the liver. There would be damage to the autonomous nervous system. And the moment this happens, the impulses that are regulated by the sympathetic system, which are those of fighting and fleeing, and those that are regulated by the parasympathetic nervous system, those that have to do with resting and digesting, they will all suffer consequences, creating damage to the human machine. So how is it that people end up like this? How is it that they end up consumed by the vice of alcohol? Well, there is always a first stage that is a stage of initiation. There are three defined aspects of alcoholism, and the first one is called initiation. And this usually happens at a very young age. People will be invited by others. There will be peer pressure. They will try to fit in. And as they do this, well, when we combine this with other social matters that may be influencing the psyche of that creature, well, then they will fall victim into the claws of Algol. Many of these reasons could be because they feel brokenhearted. They can be brokenhearted because of a situation at home, or they can be brokenhearted because of a situation with a loved one. They can feel betrayed. They can feel abandoned. They can feel that there has been some sort of rejection. And when that moral pain takes over, they feel that they must consume something to overcome it. And yes, they can drink something. When we're suffering of moral pain, there is a beautiful magic that is known as the magic of the roses that every one of you can do at any given moment to heal yourself from the moral pain of being brokenhearted, betrayed, abandoned, rejected, big loss, etc. You can do that. And there is an aspect in the consciousness that knows that you can do and work, enjoy the benefits of this magic of the roses, drink it and see yourself healed. But because the ego is so irrational, because it is so confused, it just knows it has to drink something, but then alcohol says, here, like that man on the narrow path of Quetzalcoatl, drink this so that you can pass into that side of happiness. There are people who even drink to make themselves ready. They feel themselves inadequate, incompetent, and they need some extra fire. So they take that extra fire of the moonshine, that extra fire of the scotch, the vodka, the stolies, and they can, just to be able to stand in front of an audience and talk to them. When people start following the poor example of others, when they give themselves to inferior emotions, when they give themselves with the justification to even celebrate, the demon alcohol brings them closer and eventually traps them. Now, first, there's initiation, and the second thing that happens is intoxication. Now, intoxication happens because the person forces this condition into their body. The body will naturally make use of its defense systems. People who drink alcohol, well, frankly, we have not seen anyone who has taken a cup of alcohol, drank it, and from the first moment said, "This is great." On a personal note, this is something that I have not seen. I am sure that there must be somebody out there. But on the friends that I have not seen that. Every time that I saw them as I was teenagers, I would see them clench their eyes. I will see them tighten their lips. I will see them kind of cringe. And yet, they will force themselves to continue consuming it. And as they did this, they overcame the natural defense mechanism of the body. And then the body accepted the alcohol. Then it normalized that condition of burning. Then it normalized that initial strange flavors or taste that some of these drinks have. And the moment the body accepts it, well, the body starts becoming conditioned, and the person starts thinking that they cannot do certain things without that. They will be afraid to approaching a young, beautiful woman, or a young woman would be afraid of just talking to some man that she may find handsome. They may find, they believe that they cannot just go out and do their surgery because I have not had my drink today. They feel that they cannot just sit down and do their homework calmly and relaxed because they think that they missed this. And on top of that, the body then starts reacting in such ways that it induces shakes in the body. It creates conditions of fear and inadequacy that then can only be overcome with more alcohol. But what we have truly seen is that there is always a moral tragedy. We have always noticed that there is a deep pain that they are willing to talk to someone about it. Something that they have shoved so deep into their subconsciousness, making pretend that it did not exist. At the moment that alcohol is there, they will unearth that and bring that out. And when that happens, the psychology of the drunkard becomes very prevalent. Because, of course, the psychology of the drunkard has only one purpose, and that is to drink. But when they think that they need it, when they create this psychophysical dependency, suddenly, if they find themselves that they have no money, they come up with ways in which having no money is no problem. We have seen so many times, so many young, beautiful girls and young women who would boast about how many drinks they had that night, and how is it that they had not spent a single dollar in them. And because this invites different behaviors, this invites people to be taking certain risks, we see the gradual loss of honor, of dignity, of responsibility, and the person ends up becoming completely immoral. All of this because they fall onto the the claws of this demon Algol. And the worst thing is that there's still a thought that Algol is something to negotiate with. They think that they can have one cup. Because as you have read the books of Samael, it is likely that you have come across some books in which he says, no, don't drink. And in other books in which he says, well, if you're going to drink, don't drink more than 3 little cups. And this creates some unnecessary confusion in the reader, in the student. First of all, because many students have no idea which book came first. Because if they would realize, they would see, well, yes, that is the first advice that he gives. He is trying to bring an audience to exercise a higher degree of ethics. So he's saying, if you're in a situation in which you absolutely must, then yes, have not more than 3 small cups. Yes. But later on, he makes this clarification. He says, don't drink. Don't lead your steps into the slippery slope, because you cannot negotiate with Algol. You just can't. The moment that you identify, you fascinate, and you always fall into the sleep of consciousness. And lamentably, the final stage of all of this abuse in the body, this initiation, this intoxication, eventually with the abuse of the body results in death. But not only death because of the consequences of alcohol in the physical body per se, where the machine no longer functions. It is also the death of the physical body because the poor judgment invites risks that are completely unnecessary. With impaired judgment, with impaired reflexes, with a motor center that is now under the effect of this substance, the physical machine will not operate the best optimum way. And the causes of death, they of course go beyond ulcers in the stomach. They go beyond the problem of cirrhosis. We have seen many people who have lost their lives in car accidents, who have killed others in vehicle accidents, who have destroyed families just because of this. So an education is necessary. The best example that our children, the young people can have, is the one that they can receive at home. Parents who are very aware, who are very observant, who understand the dangers of this, and they can educate the children. Because the idea here is not to just tell the children what to do. The idea is not here to just tell the children what to think. The idea here is to teach the children how to think, so that when they are ready to exercise their free will, they know enough. And if then they are making a decision that they know that it is destructive, that decision is made consciously and not by just another accident of nature. For this education, well, certainly it starts at the home. But this is an education that should also be brought into schools. All of these consequences of alcohol should be made evident to children, just like we have seen the dramatic change in the United States when it has come to smoking, where many packs of cigarettes today no longer have logos, but rather a black and white box or some rudimentary colors and a big label that says this will kill you. So if you use it, you're using it consciously, knowing about the dangers and the damage that you're exposing yourself to. So there has to be good education. Much has been done with this concept of what in Spanish is known as ley seca. Ley means law, seca means dry. So these laws, they will restrict drinking to some days only or to some times of the day or some locations. People always, they make use of the cleverness and the astuteness of the ego to figure out ways on how to drink. And people find this so amusing that many of them even make jokes of it. We have seen a co-host of one of these night shows who walks into these very opulent fashion shows, and he calls many actors because they know him, and he will come up with a fake microphone and he unscrews the top of the microphone, and inside there is just a little bottle of alcohol. And then they take shots in an area where people should not drink, and people laugh, and they set the laughter in the background, and everything is a joke. But that is only highlighting the cleverness of the ego to just create workarounds around this. We need of creative comprehension. an audio visual means so that the students, the people who are learning, can see, touch, and feel the effect of this is certainly the best way to do it. What happens when you drink? There is an effect created by the larvae of alcohol. Now, some people hear the word larvae and they immediately see in the screen of their mind something like a maggot. Let's consider that is an invented definition. That is not what larvae is, even though some larvae look like that. When we speak in esoteric terms of larvae, larvae comes from a Latin root word called larva, and it means ghost, evil spirit, demon. The moment that we start consuming alcohol, we enable the creation of egos associated with this, and these ghosts, these evil spirits, these devils that we create, they are created within our own belly, within our own womb. These particular entities will exist within the fourth dimension of nature, and they will nourish themselves from the vitality of the physical body. So you by now know that the physical body has a perfect mirror, which is of a vital, ethereal nature. So we have a physical body and the vital body that infuses life in every atom and particle of the physical body. These larvae will feed themselves from the vital aspect of the body. And like any other larvae, they will continue to stimulate the vice that gave them life. There are other types of larvae. People who masturbate, well, they create larvae that is associated to masturbation. And the worst is that wherever there is that fluid that it lands as it comes out of the body, whether you're a man or a woman, wherever that fluid lands, that becomes a focal point for the growth of that larvae. And whenever that larvae is demanding of that nourishment, it will invite the same mistakes that brought them back to life. How can you get rid of them? Well, you can create a smoke. If you had hot embers, you can take berries of juniper. You can take leaves of juniper. And you can toss them in those embers, and that smoke will help destroy these larvae. If you live in a house where people like to drink, where alcohol has been spilled, where many other things have happened, it is a good idea to get these hot embers, and you can get these berries of juniper, and you can get these little leaves of the juniper tree, and as you allow them to burn with that smoke, smoke the space, smoke the body, and that will help get rid of these particular larvae. This is very useful because the more you do this, the more of these can be destroyed, and of course there's less influence. Less influence in the psyche, less influence, of course, in thoughts and in the emotion. But if you don't have juniper, one thing that you can use is brimstone. This is yellow sulfur dust. Now, allow us to tell you this. Burning sulfur is dangerous because sulfur is very toxic. The moment that you burn this yellow dust of sulfur in hot embers, that oxidation process generates sulfur oxides that will harm your body if you are not in a well-ventilated area. When you pour of this yellow dust under the hot embers, there will be a blue flame that is created. And those ethereal vapors that are released, they are exceedingly aggressive, and they will destroy alcohol larvae. They will destroy all kinds of larvae that exist attached to your vital body or to your astral body. That is a tremendous cleanser. But again, you have to do this in a place where you have good ventilation. So please, we beg you, if you are going to do this, open the windows in your home and make sure that you clear the area to allow all of that to dissipate. We do not want to see you get hurt. So this is how we can eliminate the larvae of alcohol. And there is something else that we can do. There's a practice called osmotherapy. Osmotherapy is a beautiful thing. Because if we could summarize osmotherapy in a single statement, it is an act of kindness and love. That's it. When you are going to do the practice of osmotherapy, if you happen to have someone in your family who has been enticed by the vice of alcohol, somebody who has been drinking for a while, you're starting to notice the effects, they are reluctant to break with this vice. Allow them to go to sleep. But as they go to sleep, help prepare their room. It is a good idea if you burn frankincense. Frankincense is phenomenal for any kind of superior work of natural magic. Frankincense always prepares the environment for superior work. And of course, taking the learnings from Paracelsus, the master of medicine, a great master of gnosis as well, Paracelsus stated, everything is toxic. And nothing is toxic. It all depends on the dose that is administered. So this should invite us to reflect. If we're going to use some frankincense, well, that means that we should use enough so that there is the presence of the frankincense, of that soul of the frankincense in the room, but not so much frankincense that it looks like a smoke room, that it looks like you're in a disco. Certainly that is not what we're looking for. So prepare the environment with frankincense, not just any incense, frankincense. Prepare the environment with the perfume, like the essential oil of roses. The rose is the mother of all the flowers. The rose came unto earth, and it was a gift from the great humanities of Venus. The essential oil of the rose. As the person breathes this and relaxes, it helps create the right environment for them. And once they have fallen asleep, hold their right hand. And as you are holding their right hand, speak to them in terms of kindness, compassion, and love. Invite them to reconsider the consumption of alcohol. Let them know what you have observed that most likely they have not even noticed yet. Let them know of the effect that this is happening in the family nucleus, how it may be affecting the children, how it is affecting the relationship. If there are any other situations that are worth mentioning, speak of them, but speak always with infinite love. Notice that is entirely different as telling the person that they should stop and blaming them and criticizing them and shaming them while they're asleep, because that is only going to make their ego even so much worse. What we're seeking to do here is to deposit words of love, passion, and kindness in their heart so that they can enliven the consciousness. When you give this advice, when you counsel them with infinite love, well, all of these words start landing within the subconsciousness, and the person starts responding in a way that is very favorable. Now, we cannot possibly think, okay, I'll do this, and you do this for 5 minutes, and think that the problem is going to be solved. No. To this, we have to invest of the substance of sacrifice. Every time that we do this, that we go through the hassle of getting the essential oil, getting the incense, of preparing the room, of being there late at night and talking to them with this kindness, all of those little things contribute into something bigger. Because every action, every word, that they are all important, they all bring of this substance of sacrifice for humanity. And this substance of sacrifice starts impregnating the environment. And it becomes kind of like a canvas where you can stencil that great masterpiece of work. This is osmotherapy. And if there is a need, your children, your husband, your brother, your sister, your parents, your neighbor, and you can do this. By all means, deposit these words with infinite love in their consciousness. Now, one more thing Samael says. It says, dictators of all times have not ignored that it is easier to control and enslave a population of ones who drink than a population of non-drinkers. So we will invite you to leave the vice if you have already embraced it. We will invite you to open yourself to that which is new and to exercise a deep and profound transformation. So, dear friends, this has been our lecture tonight on alcoholism. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, and may all beings be happy.